25 men, one woman, and a single night to prove herself. In the labyrinthine heart of Rome, where shadows pulled beneath marble arches and whispers carried like venom, an extraordinary and almost inconceivable contest was unfolding. Not for wealth, not for glory, not even for survival. This was a challenge of will, desire, and audacity, and the woman at its center would etch her name into history forever. Her name was Valeria Messalina. By day, she was Empress, walking the polished halls of power beside her husband. By night, she entered a world far darker and far more dangerous, a life she chose for herself, where ambition, lust, and the raw edges of human desire collided. Her choices would eventually topple her empire, and the story that survived has fascinated, horrified, and bewildered historians for nearly 2,000 years. What you are about to hear is a story of power, obsession, and the precarious line between influence and ruin. Rome glimmered under the Mediterranean sun. Marble temples reflected the light in a blinding white. Markets buzzed with life, and senators plotted in shadowed halls. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization, the pulse of the empire throbbed with paranoia, lust, and danger. Caligula's reign had descended into chaos. Executions became routine. Every word spoken carried risk. Survival demanded subtlety, patience, and invisibility. In this volatile world lived Claudius, Caligula's uncle, a man dismissed as weak, stammering, physically frail, and seemingly irrelevant. For decades, his family relegated him to the sidelines, assuming he would never matter. That very assumption, ironically, would save his life and shape the fate of Rome. Elsewhere, in a grand mansion reflecting the glory of Rome's ancient aristocracy, lived a 15-year-old girl named Valeria Messalina. Descended from the sister of Augustus, her bloodline alone marked her for greatness. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing dark hair, pale skin, and features so precise they seem sculpted. But it was not beauty alone that commanded attention, it was intensity. A gaze that measured, weighed, and silently judged all who dared meet it. Messalina was ambitious, clever, and entirely unaware that her future would be dictated not by choice, but by politics. The marriage that began it all in Rome, marriage was never love. It was power, strategy, and survival. When Caligula arranged Messalina's marriage to Claudius, a man 3 decades her senior, no one expected much. Claudius would never rule, and the marriage merely served the machinery of imperial politics. Imagine being 15 and told your life would be handed to a man you scarcely knew, a man whose every gesture reminded the world of his weakness. For Messalina, it was the beginning of a gilded prison. Yet the empire had other plans. 3 years later, the assassination of Caligula threw Rome into chaos. Soldiers found Claudius hiding, trembling behind a curtain, and mockingly or perhaps ironically proclaimed him emperor. Suddenly, the man dismissed as weak ruled the greatest empire in history, and Valeria Messalina, barely 18, became Empress, the Empress who chose her own darkness. What does one do with absolute power at 18? Claudius, absorbed in administration, proved uninspiring as a lover. Messalina, with unlimited wealth, influence, and access to Rome's pleasures, found herself trapped in a gilded cage of boredom and ambition. Ancient sources suggest that she began venturing out at night, disguised, wearing simple clothing and a blonde wig. She roamed Rome's streets, accompanied only by a trusted attendant. Her destination, the Suburra, the infamous district where the city's most notorious prostitutes plied their trade. Here, Messalina offered her services, sometimes for pay, sometimes without it. Under the alias Lysis, the shadow, the psychology is staggering. She did not do this for survival, nor out of necessity. This was choice driven by something deeper, an insatiable desire, a need for control, a compulsion that no wealth or title could satisfy. And yet, even this secret was not enough. Messalina's palace parties became increasingly decadent. Senators, their wives, and Rome's elite were drawn into spectacles of lust and power, often coerced into acts they would later regret. Attendance was not optional. Decline brought ruin. Here, pleasure and politics intertwined seamlessly, and Messalina ruled not just by law, but by secret knowledge, guilt, and unspoken terror. The night that cemented her infamy, the event that would immortalize her name, was extraordinary. Pliny the Elder and other contemporary writers recount that Messalina challenged Rome's most celebrated courtesan, Sulla, to see who could satisfy the most men in a single day. 2 women, 1 empress, 1 professional sex worker, and a tally of men said to reach 25 or more within 24 hours. The logistics, the physical impossibility, the sheer audacity, it defies modern comprehension. Historians remain skeptical of the exact numbers. Yet the very existence of such stories in multiple sources suggests that Romans genuinely believed their empress had crossed a boundary no woman should ever approach. Modern psychology might interpret such behavior as hypersexuality or compulsive sexual disorder, a pattern of escalating desire, obsession, and risk-taking, manifesting in ways that alienate, terrify, and ultimately destroy. The descent into open defiance by day, Messalina was flawless, elegant, commanding, dutiful. By night, she pursued pleasures the empire's laws could not restrain. Her reputation, once whispered, spread like wildfire. Rumors thickened in the streets of Rome, in the halls of power, and eventually, into the ears of those poised to act against her. Her enemies were many: Narcissus, a freedman with unparalleled influence, and other palace officials who watched her every move. They waited, and in 48 CE, Messalina provided the evidence they needed. She fell in love not with Claudius, her husband and emperor, but with Gaius Salius, a senator renowned for his charm, wealth, and ambition. While Claudius was away overseeing grain shipments, Messalina publicly married Salius in a grand Roman ceremony, attended by senators, musicians, and aristocrats. Some accounts suggest the marriage was consummated or staged to appear so. It was audacious, it was reckless, and it was impossible to ignore. The final hour's word of the ceremony reached Claudius. Narcissus seized control, mobilizing the Praetorian Guard. Messalina, either oblivious or in denial, continued her celebrations. Her world unraveled with terrifying speed. She attempted one last manipulation, presenting her children to Claudius, hoping their innocence would temper his wrath. But Narcissus intercepted her. Her final plea would never reach her husband. Gaius Salius was executed first, swiftly and without mercy. Guests of the wedding feast appeared, some executed, some forced to take their own lives. Messalina herself retreated to the gardens of her estate, her power gone, her future extinguished. She attempted to take her own life, but fear and indecision held her captive. Finally, the tribune sent to end her life did so, ending her story at 22 years old, in the very garden she had once controlled. The legacy of Messalina. Claudius reportedly continued his meal upon receiving news, as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Yet for historians, her story became a cautionary tale of ambition, desire, and the terrifying consequences of female agency in a patriarchal society. Tacitus, Juvenal, Suetonius, and Pliny, each with their biases, painted her as a monster. But modern scholars ask, what of her perspective? Her voice was erased. Her intentions remain unknown. What if her so-called excesses were the only means she had to assert control over her body, her life, her choices? Messalina's children suffered the consequences. Britannicus would be poisoned, Octavia forced into a miserable marriage and eventual death. Meanwhile, those who orchestrated her downfall rose to power, shaping Rome in ways she had once sought to command. Her story is a mirror reflecting the fragility of power, the cruelty of historical narrative, and the peril of challenging societal expectations. The empress who dared to live by her own rules became a legend not necessarily for what she did, but for what society feared she represented, a woman in control of her desire, her body, and her life. Valeria Messalina's tale is unsettling because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. Power is fleeting. History is written by the victors. And female agency has always been a threat to patriarchal structures. She was married at 15, ruled as empress at 18, and dead at 22. 7 years of audacity, scandal, and absolute influence ended in a garden, silenced by the very machinery she once commanded. We may never know the full truth, but what we do know is this: history's monsters are often more human, more fascinating, and more complex than the stories preserved by those in power. Messalina was one such figure, a brilliant, dangerous, and tragically misunderstood empress whose echoes of audacity still ripple through time.